Gospel of Matthew. If another member of the church sins against you, go and point out the fault when the two of you are alone. If the member listens to you, you have regained that one. But if you are not listened to, take one or two others along with you, so that every word may be confirmed by the evidence of 2 or 3 witnesses. If the member refuses to listen to them, tell it to the church. And if the offender refuses to listen even to the church, let such a one be to you as a Gentile and a tax collector. Truly, I tell you, whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. Again, truly, I tell you, if 2 of you agree on earth about anything you ask, it will be done for you by my Father in heaven. For where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, I am there among them.
Will you pray with me, please? Loving God, we come together, and we give you thanks for these opportunities to share in times of worship. May your Spirit touch us now and enrich our lives and renew us. We ask this in the name of Christ. Amen. Some time back, I was in a coffee shop, and there was a couple that walked in with their phones in their hands staring at them. They stared at them all the way through the line while they ordered. They went and sat at a table across from each other and sat with their phones the whole time, texting. They eventually got up and left, and I never saw them speak a word. Later, I wondered if maybe they were texting each other, and that was the only way they ever communicate. But I realized that these folk were not that unusual in their behavior. We spend more and more time connected to our devices and less time face-to-face talking about people. Wouldn't you agree? Wouldn't you agree that something's happened in our land to human relationships? We seem to have become less trusting, more suspicious, fearful of opening ourselves to other people. Some of us have no real, true, close friends. We've become more isolated, more alone. Now, many of us grew up in a very different world. The houses we grew up in had a big front porch. Family spent the evening there. As kids, we ran up and down the street and played with everyone in the front yards and in the street. Everyone knew their neighbor. But then we changed something. We transitioned from that front porch to the deck in the backyard. We put up a privacy fence. But the thing was, we could still stand on our deck and yell at the neighbor next door. We could communicate back and forth. From there, we retreated into our homes, and we have a home theater with our great big screen and quiet and dark. We don't talk to anyone. Now we've made another transition. We each have our own little private device, an iPad or a tablet, or we have these VCRs we can carry into another room. And we each watch our own movies. We watch the things we want to watch. It's streamed to us. And we're all alone. We might have a lot of friends on Facebook, but seldom do we ever really talk directly to them. We might message back and forth once in a while. There's been a loss of some of the closeness of our friendships. Robert Putnam wrote a book entitled Bowling Alone. And he took the title from the fact that a survey was done, and there are more people bowling now than there ever have been. But there are fewer leagues than there ever have been. People are bowling by themselves or just with their families. There's been a steady decline in recent years of civic involvement, of neighborhood relationships, of participation in all different kinds of things. And Putnam found that the level of community in America right now is almost at an all-time low. How sad that is for us. Therapist Will Miller wrote a book he entitled Refrigerator Rights. And he was dealing with a similar kind of theme. But what he said is, all of us need to have people around us with what he calls refrigerator rights. That's someone who can walk into your home and feel free enough to walk over the refrigerator, open it up, make a sandwich, and never ask you. I think my kids would do that at my house, but I don't know how many other places. But how many of us have friends that close? How many of us feel comfortable? In fact, Miller argues that many Americans suffer mentally and emotionally because they have so few close relationships. And studies have shown that our society is suffering from a lack of involvement with one another. And not only does society suffer, but we as individuals suffer as a result of that. Some time back, a team from Harvard had some social scientists study the lives of 7,000 people over a period of 9 years. And here's what they found. People with the fewest personal relationships were 3 times more likely to die than those with strong relational connections. 3 times. In fact, people with bad health habits, like smoking and poor diets and obesity, no exercise, but still had strong social ties, lived significantly longer than people who had great health habits and were isolated. In other words, as John Ortberg put it, it's better to eat Twinkies with good friends than broccoli all by yourself. Robert Putnam noted if you belong to no groups but join just one, if you belong to just one group in some way, he said you cut your risk of dying by over half. So we've somehow lost some relationships. Now, relationships aren't always easy. Sometimes they're messy. They're never simple. I found a cute little saying online this week that says, to live above with those we love, that will be glory. To live below with those we know, that's another story. Whenever 2 or more people come together in any kind of a relationship deeper than just a casual hello, there's going to be conflict. It's a part of life. We can't avoid it. And in our gospel lesson today, Jesus talks about conflict resolution. He talks about it for the church, but also I think it speaks to us as individuals. Every relationship, be it our families, our friends, our groups, are capable of somehow wounding us. People are people, wherever we find them. And people hurt us. Sometimes they do it intentionally, sometimes unintentionally. Sometimes they don't even realize they've done it. But deciding who's right or who's wrong is not what the important part is. It's about finding common ground so that we can maintain the relationships we have. And that may mean that we have to take the first step even though we know the other person's wrong. I have a dear friend by the name of Walter, and the first time I met Walter, we were across a table on opposite sides of an issue. When I left the meeting, I thought, what a jerk. He later told me he thought I was rather obnoxious. I can't understand why. Well, over the time period that we dealt with that issue, we developed a friendship, and I consider Walter a very dear friend today. It probably also helps that my side won. But when conflict comes, the question is not about who's right. The question needs to be about what's best for our relationship. And if your primary concern is the relationship, you don't mind being the first one who takes the step to seek reconciliation. In other words, if someone you care about hurts you, it's important that you make an attempt to heal that relationship as quickly as possible, even if you're not the one at fault. But that's hard for us to do. That sounds practical, sounds like great advice, but it's not easy. But wouldn't it be great if everyone who's estranged from a family member or a coworker or someone would just pick up the phone and make an appointment? Unfortunately, our problem today is we don't really take time to disconnect from all the distractions to speak to each other face to face. We allow problems to fester and to grow, and we seldom resolve them. We're so plugged into everything else that we lose some of that closeness we need with those around us. Patton Oswalt, in the most recent issue of Time magazine, writes about taking a 90-day break from his phone, and all he would use his phone for was phone calls. I want to share with you a couple of things that he said in that article. He said, a couple of times in line at the grocery store or coffee shop, instead of taking out my phone, I'd look around at the world at the people around me. Most of them were looking at their phones. We now inhabit a planet where the majority of the population is constantly staring downward like carpenter ants. He said, sometimes I'd catch the gaze of a holdout like me, but they were unique and far between. And he concludes with this. He said, here's a thought. What if the next fashionable rebellion of whatever generation comes along rears its head and says it's going to be unlinked and will only be reachable face to face? How amazing that would be. So we read this gospel story today, and Jesus tells us we should confront those who hurt us. But when we hear that word confront, that seems very harsh for us. We're not good at that. We couldn't confront each other today. We couldn't decide to stand or sit. Confront sounds like we're headed for a battle. But there are a lot of definitions for confront. And I found one that I think really speaks to what we need to do. And that definition is this. To confront is to deal with something in an honest and direct way. Isn't that what we say we want in life? We want people to be honest with us. We want people to tell us the truth. Well, then we need to be open to that. Yet for many reasons we fail to deal with other people as we should when there's problems. And there's a lot of reasons for that. And it's likely that we probably fall into certain categories about why we avoid confronting other people. We might be someone who's an avoider, and we do everything imaginable to avoid having to deal with the problem. We get very creative at it. We find out where that person's going to be, and we make sure we're never there. We avoid them. Or if we do see them, then we only touch on very safe topics. We keep it very shallow. And in our closest relationships, sometimes we just clam up. In marriages, when people stop talking, problems start developing. Somehow that feels safer for her, but we know it never works. It just doesn't work, and the problem won't just go away on its own. Jackie Joyner-Kersee, one of the great athletes that we have heard about, who is an Olympic gold medalist, says that she and her husband, Bobby, have a unique way of discussing problems. On one side of their house is a small office. They've designated it the mad room. And whenever they have a disagreement, Bobby and Jackie go into the mad room. And no one's allowed to leave until it's resolved. For some of us, we'd have to have a refrigerator and stove and a bathroom in there to... But if we don't deal with things, they continue to grow. They don't just go away. Or maybe we like to carry a grudge. Some of us are good at that. And most of us know just really how productive that is, but we hold those feelings and we mentally plot all the ways that someday we're going to get even. We replay the incident in our mind over and over again and fantasize about what we should have said. And what's that do for us? Well, for most of us, if we're really working on a grudge, we have trouble sleeping, our stomachs hurt, we're miserable. And the sad part is that many times the person against whom we have that grudge isn't even aware we have the grudge, first of all. And secondly, they don't suffer. They don't even have the decency to get a rash while I feel miserable. So it doesn't work. Grudges eat at me, but they do nothing to solve something with someone else. Maybe I'm a gossiper. You know, the ones who like to tell everyone about the problem except the person that should be told. Never speak to the one who hurt them, but confide in everyone else. None of those work. But sometimes we hold on to all that stuff in relationships and never get them healthy. Barbara Brown Taylor tells a story about a woman who was dying of cancer, and her husband had died of a heart attack. And at the funeral home, people were leaning over to her, trying to console her, reminding her that it wouldn't be long that she and her husband would be together again in heaven. Well, later this woman is talking to Barbara Brown Taylor, and she said, "You know, I don't think I'm ever going to get away from him." It's So the issue comes down to, what do we do? And the text tells us how to go about making things better. First and foremost, it says go in person. Meet face to face. Talk together. Speak about the hurt. Be honest about the pain. Begin there. And it's important to do it in private when you're alone, because privacy minimizes any embarrassment. It's less intimidating than being confronted in a public place. And we need to trust that somehow when we begin that process, it begins that first step toward healing. Jesus says, go to your fellow member and point out the offense. But part of that is also listening. That's right. Mutual listening. It's not agreements about everything that hold us together, but our willingness to listen to one another. To listen and agree is not always easy. But when we listen, we can also disagree and respect those disagreements. It's important we listen. Because if we just go confront someone and forget what the real purpose of it is, it's not very fruitful. And the purpose isn't to compel a confession out of the other person or to ease our own suffering or to win our point of view. It's to regain the relationship. It's about dealing with the problem in an open and honest way. When we confront someone, when we deal with the problem, we have to listen. Go and point out the fault when the two of you are alone. If the member listens to you, you've regained one. Eugene Peterson puts it a little differently. He said, if they listen, you've regained a friend or a relationship. And in listening, we may not always agree, but we've heard the other person, and we've been heard. And we may have saved a friendship, a relationship, family. We're also to go in peace. It's not about vindication. It's not about judgment. It's about understanding and finding some kind of reconciliation. It's easy for us, if we're offended, to kind of go in with our guns blazing to seek revenge, but that involves nothing good. We're supposed to listen. The ancient philosopher Zeno said, we're endowed with 2 ears and 1 mouth, as a constant reminder to listen twice as much as we speak. And so we approach it with gentleness, seeking restoration. Caring doesn't avoid confrontation. Caring calls us to acknowledge it, to acknowledge that things don't always go right, to bring an awareness of attitudes and actions that harm us and harm others, to provide a healing space for that relationship, a place free of judgment, a place free of condemnation. It's a love for one another that God has given to us in Christ. It takes one person to forgive. It takes 2 people to reconcile. We can't be in charge of the actions of someone else. We can't even be in charge of the whole outcome of the situation. That would be seeking control, and that's not an act of love. We can't always control the outcome. But when we have gone and done all that we can, when we've listened, we've given hope. When we're ready to forgive, that's what we're called to do. And so we're gathered here today. We're gathered here and we hear words about love and forgiveness and hope. We gather at this table and talk about God's forgiveness for us, about the hope that we have as we partake in this holy feast. And we commit ourselves to working for love, to working for peace in all of our relationships. So may we be challenged by these words of Jesus to mend the broken relationships in our lives. May we be ready to forgive, to move on. I pray that for all of us, that all that is broken can somehow be restored. Amen.